Hello, everybody.
And we
Oh,
are
never mind. Sorry.
live. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another installation of YYC Dev. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're hosting a little bit later than normal. We'd love to hear some feedback on whether this time works better or worse so that we can schedule events at the times that are most convenient for you. If you've never been here before, welcome to our group. Please engage in chat since we can't all be hanging out in one room. This is a great time to network and ask questions, see who else is here. Usually we have a recruiter or two lurking, so if you're looking for work, that's a great place to let people know. So a little bit about YYC Dev. YYC Dev is for the technical crowd from any background. We are a language and framework agnostic collaborative community project. It's for designers and developers or people with really unique job titles who want to come get inspired by all the really fascinating things that exist in the tech world. Here, there is no JavaScript versus Ruby devs or web versus software devs, junior or senior devs. We're just a bunch of nerds who want to come together to talk about the thing we love most. And we want you to leave inspired, connected, and brimming with excitement for your craft, or to share some wisdom with us. There's always an open invitation to come and speak. It doesn't matter if it would be your first speaking engagement or a deep technical dive. We want to share the stage with you. If you're a company looking for some exposure, we'd love to chat with you about being a sponsor for our group and how you can contribute to the tech community. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, we're always looking for new ways to bring value to the community. Don't hesitate to ask them in chat or reach out on Meetup. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session where I'll grab questions from the chat. Feel free to post them during the presentation and we'll answer them in order when the presentation's done. That's all I have for housekeeping. So I'm really excited to have Jonathan here to speak about Elixir. He's recently left working at a local startup, Phillip, and is soon wrapping up his paternity leave. He knows a lot about JavaScript and the React ecosystem, a good amount of theory about infra and distributed systems, and has a deep love of functional languages like Elixir. So without further ado, Jonathan, take it away.
Hello. Great to have everyone here. I'm really excited for the turnout. If I can just get a few more people onto the cult of Elixir by the end of this, I think I'll be pretty happy. Like Serene said, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all for giving me your time and your ears. And I'm just a regular developer who consumes probably far too much knowledge about programming languages and programming frameworks, probably to a non-useful level, but sometimes it yields some really positive results, and Elixir was one of those positive results. So I'm hoping that over this time I can convince you that it's worth trying out. So I titled this Elixir, the most important programming language in your tool belt. And, I think you'll see why, but it's really because of its versatility and it's fun. So let's move on. I don't know if any of you guys have seen Anchorman, but I just thought this was a great quote for me starting off trying to sell you guys on Elixir. They've done studies, 60% of the time it works every time. It's from Anchorman, Fantana. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who likes Anchorman or Will Ferrell, but sometimes it just brings joy to my eyes. So I want to just go through quickly what this talk's going to be about, why I think you guys should care about it, or what I think will provide value from it. And then I'm going to go through what this talk is not about. So I'm going to start out with a really quick what and why of functional programming. What is it, why you should care, and why you should probably either consider using it or using paradigms that are functional. Why I'm actually going to make a really bold claim that Elixir is a better OOP language than Java. I'm going to do a quick live demo where I'm going to TDD a super basic app, but just show off a few of the features I really like about Elixir, and then you guys can see an actual really short little workflow. And then there's going to be attributes to make up language choices for me. So on your next project or in your company, when you guys are considering a big project or a big change, things that matter to me, and I think I'm going to make a case for mattering to you, for making up a choice of a language for a project or something, and why, for me, Elixir, again, is that uniquely suited language for most of those tasks. And I'm going to try and finish off with giving you guys a few things to talk to your bosses about if you're trying to actually sell this to a business or a project owner, because I actually think there's a lot of business value in Elixir. And I think that's ultimately what we're here for, is we're here to provide business value. As much as we like technology and we like creating things, that's not what we get paid for. And then some Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of, outrageous facts about Elixir and some companies using it. So just to hopefully stir the pot a little bit. What this talk isn't, it's not a deep dive into the language. There's a huge amount of stuff I'm not going over. It's not a deep dive into the ecosystem. There's a tool chain that automatically comes with any Elixir or Erlang application. And that's called the Beam, which is essentially the Erlang virtual machine. Super cool, but not going to get into it. Not going to discuss a bunch of nuances. Again, some of those might come up in questions. I'm not going to discuss how you can use Elixir in lightweight systems like Raspberry Pi or embedded systems, but you can. Again, some of these tools, there's a lot of development tools that really improve the developer experience, but I'm not even going to touch on them in this talk. Some of them will be in the resources, though, in case you would like to poke around. Again, I'm not going to talk about Elixir as an actual web development language for building isomorphic web applications, which just means you're writing Elixir in the back end and the front end, similar to what we do with JavaScript, where, we're writing them in both a lot of the time with Node and React. And that is something you can do with Phoenix, but it's a whole topic on its own. And then, why Elixir's actor model is also really great for DDD and CQRS. So again, I know this was a little bit of a hard sell. I kind of turned the what this talk isn't into a little bit of a way to whet your appetite, but figured I'd have some fun with it. So why functional programming? I don't know if many of you guys are in the Ruby community. You'll know Jessica Kerr. Her and Navdeep Grimm are both fixtures of the Ruby community and really awesome people. But one of the things she said was, "Go-to is evil," because we asked, how did we get to this point of execution? But mutability leaves us with this: how did I get to this state? And if you've ever debugged a complex system or a production system, you'll understand exactly the challenge of shared state and mutable state. So on to functional programming. I think of functional programming as a set of constraints, but they're constraints that are positive. And I want to sell you guys really quickly on the fact that you all love constraints. You love the right constraints. The fact that we don't write in assembly, the fact that we don't write in C, is a constraint, right? We are adopting a language that forces us to use it in a certain way that helps us. And functional languages force a bunch of constraints on us that we don't get in typical Java, Ruby, JavaScript. And one of those is immutable data. So for instance, if I if I have a string in JavaScript, maybe a string is not a good example, but if I have an object in JavaScript and I go in and I change the field name from Nelson to Jono, anyone who also has a reference to that object is going to now have the new state that says Jono. Now, part of the challenge of that is when multiple different things are operating on the same piece of data, the same piece of state, it's just incredibly hard to tease apart what happened, why it's in a certain state, and especially if it goes into an inconsistent state, you're kind of hooked. For me, and I'm not going to try and convince you of this, but I think it's something to think about, is I think personally that it's easier to think in terms of processes like, grab box. If we're talking about shipping, we say, hey, grab box, label box, weigh box, ship box. Like, to me, that's a flow that makes sense, as opposed to trying to find a way of stuffing stuff, values into an object, a bunch of functions into an object, and trying to ask, should this box save itself? Which I think we've probably all asked if we've dealt with repositories and objects and ORMs like Mongoose. I think these constraints that functional programming actually put on you are really helpful. And I know some people are saying they've actually never heard of functional programming or don't know much about it. There's a bunch of talks and resources that I think are really going to help you, and they articulate it far better than me. One of them is Dave Thomas, who is the Pragmatic Programmer, if you guys have heard of that book. And he makes a really good case for why functional is the future. Anyways, so functional is also composable. I think that's why it's so valuable, because the way we do object-oriented programming typically is with inheritance, and that's how we share things. And I think that's is just not optimal. And composability is a better way, and functional programming lends itself really well to that. And in the same way it's composable, it's also easy to refactor. You're not coupled to state that you depend on being a certain way when you use a certain method. I don't know if you guys have ever written a JavaScript or Ruby program where if you call a method at the wrong time of the object's lifecycle, it'll crash because it depends on a certain piece of data that you expect to be there because you expected someone to call methods on it beforehand, and it's not. And it just, if you ever need to try and tear that object apart and say, oh, it's got too much responsibilities, it's going to be a lot of pain. And I think we've all felt that pain in object-oriented. And the reason it's also easy to refactor is also makes it very testable. It means it's simple. There's less setup. There's less, 80 lines of mocks to make your one class work so you can test a method. And again, the same reason that all of these things are valuable is also the reason that functional programming, lends itself well to concurrency, no shared state. So now here's my contentious point, which is that Elixir is better at OOP than Java. And it's because Alan Kay, the guy who originally came up with object-oriented programming, actually, his concept for it was tell, don't ask. Keep what you know, and let me interact with you through, requests to you, but not requests of like, what's your state, but like, could you do this thing? And then you'll trigger your own need of requests to other people. You pass messages around. And the reason that this is good is because you encapsulate things. Encapsulation is one of the, I think, key attributes of a good software system. When you have setters and getters, all of you C# and Java folks, and I mean, in JavaScript, I can't really speak any better because everyone just accesses everything all the time. As soon as you can get something with a getter or set something with a setter, often you're breaking encapsulation. You're coupling yourself to the form, the shape of the data that's inside of an object. Inheritance also can cause some issues with coupling, where you try and tear apart, an inheritance tree and refactor it, and you're left with a whole lot of pain. Whereas if everything is about passing a message, making, hey, in the object world, if I'm requesting that one of you guys, I go, hey, can one of you guys leave a comment? As soon as you start to think in terms of just sending a request and saying like, do this thing, do this. Well, sorry, can I is asking. I'm just going to move on. I'm doing bad with this description, but there's a lot of ways where we break encapsulation in OOP, and functional programming can help, but most importantly, the actor model, which Elixir does, is exactly what Alan Kay, what OOP was always supposed to be about. Sending messages and telling, tell and don't ask. Don't reveal your implementation details. Don't reveal your state. One of the great things is this helps you scale. This helps you scale code, helps you scale developers so we can write better code. We can, implement features faster, and then businesses win, right? So here I'm going to try and give a really quick demo, and I'm going to do some TDD. And If any of you ever watched the old MC Hammer, I don't know, music video, this is MC Hammer. But now I'm just going to quickly go here from the start. I'm going to create a, I think, here we go, mix, new, demo. This is how you create a new Elixir app. Mix is kind of their command line, like npm. Hammer time indeed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm one of those, after my recent job, I'm one of those weird WebStorm people instead of VS Code. So I'm actually going to open up the WebStorm, and don't worry, I will make the font much bigger once it loads. What I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through FizzBuzz. FizzBuzz, for those of you who don't know, is a kind of a coding challenge given to junior developers to see if they can code and use basic math operations, essentially. What it is given some number, if that number is divisible by 3, it will be, you print out fizz. If it is divisible by 5, you will print out buzz. And if it's divisible by both 3 and 5, you will print out FizzBuzz. And for any other number, you will simply print out the number. So I'm going to take you through just, I think at most maybe 6 minutes of TDD to show off some of the pieces of the language that I really love. So remember, this is a totally new project. I haven't done anything on this. I haven't done any special setup. Elixir is really, really easy to get set up with, but that is not something to optimize for. It's just a nice thing for when you're first getting started. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do something evil and delete the test, but I'll show you why. I actually am a big proponent of test-driven development. So what you'll see here is you see it says doc test demo. Okay, this means that it's going to run doc tests for this file. So if any of you have actually played with Python and written tests in Python, you can do this, which essentially says, hey, when this is run, you can only do this obviously for simple things, because as you can see, there's no setup here. But it can be really nice for concise business logic and pure functions. So let's make this a bit bigger. Let's see if I can figure out how to make the font size bigger. Looks like it might not cooperate. I might just have to code. Okay, how bad is it? Okay, well, I'm going to attempt to do this. If it's really, really, really small, I'm sorry. FizzBuzz. I'm sorry. Quick, someone Google how to get the font size up.
Option plus should make your font size bigger.
Oh, Option plus.
Yeah.
Got it. I was trying Command plus. No.
Oh, no. Control plus? Well, it's Option plus for me, but it depends on your ID. Okay, keep going. I'll Google.
Okay, deal. So I'm just going to start out and we'll get there. So how I do TDD is I try and do the smallest amount of code change possible and then run the tests. So for this, I'm going to call this FizzBuzz, and it's going to take one argument. And I'm already getting ahead of myself. FizzBuzz of 1 should be 1. Okay, I'm going to press Control R, which reruns my tests. And while that's running, somebody says I should go into Preferences, Editor, Fonts, if preferences will ever pop up.
In theory, you should be able to hold Shift and then do the zoom thingy on your touchpad.
Wow.
I do that accidentally all the time, but that should work as well for everything. Under editor, it would be
fonts.
font, yeah.
Sorry, everybody. Let's just go really big. Okay. So FizzBuzz1 is undefined. So unlike a lot of languages where, well, at least JavaScript, where you can pass any number of arguments into a function, and if it doesn't accept them, it just returns undefined, you actually have to care about what they call the arity, which is simply the number of arguments in a function. I'm just going to close the side. So I actually have to make this take an argument or it's not going to run. And then whammo, it's going to say n is unused and failed because it's producing a world. So I'm going to do something weird here. I'm just going to put a 1 here. So how many of you have seen this type of syntax where this is not a variable? This is actually a hard-coded value. This is something called pattern matching. A lot of functional languages have it. What this is going to do is it's very much like a switch statement at the function level. It's going to look for something that matches. So here, this is 1. It goes 1, and then it looks for this and looks for this. We've made a test pass. So here, now we need to check for some of those special rules I was talking about. So with 3, it should be fizz. And what's going to happen is it's going to say, okay, I'm looking for FizzBuzz that takes a 3. This doesn't take a 3, so it's going to fail. It's going to say, following arguments were given, no function clause matches. So now let's do this. So this is considered the same function. However, it's saying, similar to an actual case statement where you might say, this is the variable. If it's this, do this. If it's this, do this. If it's this, do this. And in the same way, we're going to end up later with the default case in the same way that we end up with a switch statement. But I just want you guys to see, just kind of, in my opinion at least, how clean this logic is. I think it really separates concerns well. One of the nice things is when you're doing it on a real project, there you go. So this is failing. So now that it's failing, I'm going to do this. For those of you who aren't familiar with PDD, part of the reason that you wait for it to fail before you implement it is because it actually demonstrates to you that it's not going to pass. Sometimes you write a test that's wrong and it would have passed no matter what you wrote, or if you wrote absolutely nothing. And this kind of demonstrates to you that it's actually going to fail. So here's my final case that I was telling you guys about. If it's divisible by 3 and 5, it should say FizzBuzz. And you always want to start with most specific case to least specific case in pattern matching, because if whatever it matches first is going to be the function it runs. And the compiler will warn you if you've got some unreachable piece of code, like a function that catches everything is before another pattern. So now we've got our basic, like I've just demonstrated to you guys the basic rules of this. Now we're going to actually make it useful by making it flexible. So up here, 1 is going to become, I don't know, what do we want? Let's make it become 8. And so at this point, we've written out all of the cases that I care about. And that means that these hard-coded values are no longer valuable. So when I'm going to go and refactor this is now the time where I'm going to stop writing new cases and start refactoring the ones I already have. Okay, and that's just, if you guys are unfamiliar with that, that's the syntax of interpolation for both Ruby and Elixir. In JavaScript, it's a $. Great, so now we're passing. Guys, we're almost there. We've almost finished this. Then I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say, okay, what's the next multiple, or what's some multiple of 3 that is not a multiple of 5? I think, well, 9's a cool one. I like 9. So this should also say fizz. I'm going to run the tests again, and boom. We're going to see that it's going to pass down here. Very confident in myself. Oh, actually, that's not true. It's going to fail because I haven't done anything here. So this is where something else gets interesting with pattern matching is, basic pattern matching on values can be really nice, but it's still pretty limited. So there's a few different things you can do. You can either pattern match on a type, like you can say, hey, if n was a user, pattern match on this, otherwise continue. Or you can start to give it conditions. So the reason it's not going to be 9 period, that's a very, very good thought because of how I was doing it before. The reason I'm not going to do 9 this time is because it's a shared case. And so I'm actually going to add a guard on here where it says, when the remainder, which is just the modulo operator, when the remainder of this and 3 is 0, then do this. So this is now going to work for all of my three cases. At least I hope. Good. Okay, sweet. So what? Yeah, exactly. So this is my style of TDD where I learned this from Sandy Metz, which I think is a very nice way. Like she has a very good way of describing the slowness with which you do this TDD. You don't try and anticipate future needs, even if you know they already exist. You're going to write the code for each one incrementally without trying to get clever, as we like to do. We always like to get really clever, and I totally suffer from the same ailment as everybody else. So I should read this just to make sure it's exactly what I thought. Good. Okay, so the same thing as I thought. So here we're just going to say when the remainder is 5 of like n divided by 5 is 0, boom, we're going to get buzz. Oh, and this time I actually ruined something. That's because this is not n. There's no n. It's saying n doesn't exist. Okay. And test should pass this time. Good. And now we're on to our last case. I don't know, let's do 60 or 30 or any multiple of this. So I think what some people might say is you could write this in less lines of code. And while that's true, I actually think this this makes really clear how many cases do we care about. Oh yeah. And what are our special cases, right? This makes that extremely explicit and also really changeable. None of these are coupled to the implementation of any of the other ones. Oh, again, with the n, not changing that. Okay, so we're going to have this program. This runs. Huzzah. Now another part of this program is just going to be def run 100. And this is the actual piece of the, it's not very interesting. It's just one of the requirements. It's, yeah, so I could do a loop. I'm too lazy and I like maps better, but so I'm probably just gonna do this. This is a little piece of syntactic sugar that Ruby and Elixir have, which is it generates an array or a list in Elixir's case. I'm just gonna go, map this array of 100 down to 1 with this function, which is demo fizzbuzz. And now you're going to see a little bit of weird syntax here. So this is essentially a me passing a function as an argument. So this is saying, hey, there's a function that takes one argument that's named this, run it over this whole array. So, and in this case, I'm not actually going to write a test because, again, for the sake of brevity and laziness, I'm just going to do this. So I'm going to go into the terminal and just show you the REPL. And a REPL is just the read, evaluate, print loop, which is just a nice little way of interacting with your project. And so on a web app, on any app at all, any Elixir app, you can run this and you're going to get access to your whole code base. So in Ruby, you're going to be used to this. In Node, this is going to be magical. Being able to call your facades or your objects straight from the REPL just this easily. It's pretty amazing. So I'm just going to call run 100, right? And here, good. So this is the results of 100. So 100 is buzz because it's divisible by 5. 99 is fizz because it's divisible by 3. And then here's the results all the way down to 0. So this isn't quite printing it. So I probably should also call this. So I'm actually going to do something. Sorry, I'll do this incrementally so you guys can follow. I'm going to use something called pipes, and this is a really, really nice feature of a lot of functional languages, and I think we might even see it in JavaScript one day. So what this does is it just takes the result of whatever's above it. In this case, it's just a single value, passes it to the first argument of an m.map. And yeah, it's the same thing that we already had before. This is just a little bit different. Now, the reason this is nice is because now it makes really clear what's the subject of the call. And we're just going to keep passing the result of this into the next thing, which I'm going to go io.puts, which is, if you guys are from the Ruby world, you'll recognize puts as being the thing that prints something to the terminal. And in fact, I'm not even going to quite do that. I'm going to do it individually for every element in here, because I don't want to do a join or print line or any of that stuff. So I'm just going to go demo.run 100, and here we've printed. I'm just running demo 100, and this is saying, hey, get me an array from 100 down to 1. Run this fizzbuzz on, map this fizzbuzz, not onto it, but like with it. If you guys are familiar with map, it doesn't actually change the original data structure. So this still remains the same, and now we have a new array that is these values, and then for each one of those, I'm just going to individually call puts, which puts the thing on a new line. Ta-da! Okay. So the things, again, that I really wanted to showcase here was doc testing, because I think it's a really unique feature. It's only available in Python that I know of, and I personally really like it because your documentation must evolve with your code. Secondly, pattern matching, which is something that has been proposed for JavaScript. It's in a lot of functional languages. I think it just allows a really nice and clear separation of concerns. If I asked you how many cases are there in fizzbuzz without me telling you what it was, you could look at this and say 4. And I think that's really great. I think that's good for maintaining code and writing code. And then last is the pipe operator, which just makes it, again, when I was talking about processes, when we think in terms of processes, like if you're shipping a box, this would be the box, and then we'd apply label to box, weigh box, ship box, or calculate route for box and ship box. And we can put each of those in just one of these little pipe operators and pass that changing or that object that represents this new box or this new weighted box or whatever we want to call it all the way through, and then return it. Also, you guys might be wondering where the return is. Just like Ruby, there's an implicit return. The last thing in the function is the return value. In functional language, that makes total sense, because rarely should there ever be anything that doesn't return a value exclusively. So in this case, this is me being a little bit naughty in printing, which is technically considered an effect, but shh, don't tell anybody. So back to the presentation. I hope that was marginally interesting for you guys, showcasing some of those things. And also maybe seeing someone actually do TDD. For most of you, you've probably never seen anybody crazy enough to actually take the time to do that. So and just as a total aside on the syntactic sugar of the pipe operator and some of the other things, you can go look at the code for the pipe operator, and it is Elixir has this like the most, I think, really incredible macro system, and it's just built off of it's just built off of other pieces of the language, and it's just a macro. And so all that means is at compile time, it changes. When you write it, it looks at it and says, oh, this is now in reality, this is me just calling a function call with all of these brackets that it would normally look like in JavaScript. That would be really ugly. So, okay. So this is how I choose languages or for a project or for just enjoyment. And thank you. That's perfect, Serene. Yeah. And so that's exactly what piping does. Sorry, I'll stop looking at the chat and I'll just start talking. But how I propose you choose languages and how I personally choose a language exclusively for functional programming. Sorry, I need to stop looking at the chat. Probably confusing for everybody else. So how I propose you choose languages is, first, make sure it's fun. And that will differ for everybody. I think some people absolutely love Clojure and they love Lisp. And it is, I think, regularly, until they took it off the Stack Overflow list last year, it was regularly #1 for fun to write. Some people love Rust. For me, I think both Clojure and Elixir would both be incredibly fun to write. So for me, good developer experience is part of it. I think part of that is because it motivates you to work on problems. I think the lower the barrier we can do for this thing that takes up our entire life, and the more joy we can extract from it, the better off we are. I see I have a nice spelling mistake there. How much does it encourage clean code and coding practices? And I think a lot of functional languages do this really well. I think there's a few things in Elixir that are especially good for this too. Again, for me, a good testing story is crucial. And when I say a good testing story, I mean, how easy is it to test? How fast are my tests? All of that. And I think the language that I know of that beats Elixir and probably I would assume beats everything is OCaml with testing. Apparently, you can have a large OCaml project that has lots and lots and lots of tests, and you can compile it and run hundreds of tests in under 2 seconds. So how's that for a feedback loop? How's that for literally running on every single change you make? I think that's pretty cool. But that being said, that's OCaml. Elixir has a lot of really wonderful ones too. So anything we can do, not just in testing, but in any other part, if it provides you ways of shortening your feedback loops, whether that's like one of the great things about JavaScript is that you can mock something out without building a whole app really quickly. So I think that thinking about things in terms of what feedback loops does it shorten is really, really valuable. And then this is kind of like derived from that, but it's a more concrete thing, like how hard is all the real world stuff that, if you don't work for a giant company where there's someone devoted to doing this, and even then, how much time does it take you to deploy, to deal with some of the messy infrastructure stuff? How much infrastructure do you need just to run, a message queue, right? Like Sidekick in Ruby or, Redis, so often used in JavaScript. These sort of things are costs, right? And they, I think, increase our feedback loops. So, and then I think no matter how good a language is, if it doesn't have a good community, it's not going to have good diversity. It's not going to have good diversity of thought. It's not going to grow. It's going to become stagnant over time, no matter how good it is. And I think the OCaml community is a really good example of that. Very elitist, and I don't think very welcoming. They don't have good documentation, these sort of things. And I really think that you should strongly consider the growth, diversity of a community when you're choosing a language. So, why do I think Elixir for me fits these for me at least, is the intersection of the Venn diagram of languages that fit different pieces of what I described. I think it's very fun to write. As I said before, I think, Clojure would be really fun to write. Elixir, I think, is really fun to write. When just with pipes, pattern matching, super fun, in my opinion, super good abstractions for web development. I think it just makes it much more fun than my Express or Rails. So yeah, anyways, so for fun to write, I think Elixir is up there. I think Ruby is also good to write. I think again, Clojure is good to write. For actual writing clean code, I think processes and the actor model, which I'm really sorry for those of you who don't know what the actor model is. I don't really have time to go into it, but it's what we were talking about before, where the only way you can communicate with another object is sending a message. And all they can do is respond to you or not respond to you. And they'll have their own state, and they will choose what to do with that message you've passed, or do nothing with it or ignore it. But they will respond to each message that comes in, they will act on each message that comes in, even if that means throwing it away. And processes, actors are just great for writing clean code, and that's what Elixir comes built in with. And to my knowledge, the only language that comes built in with that. Very fast concurrent tests. It comes with a great testing framework. It allows you to write property tests really easily. If you are familiar with what property tests are, they're this crazy type of test which you describe the behavior that should happen, and then the test itself will generate between hundreds and millions of inputs to test that property that you've given. It's a bit bizarre, but it takes user error at least significantly out of the picture. So, do I keep saying methods? Sorry. Functions. With Elixir, I think one of the amazing things is that you deal far less with DevOps and infrastructure than you do with, any language I know of. And I've spent a lot of time in DevOps and infrastructure, and it's just not my favorite thing to do. So that's very key for me for shortening feedback loops, is not having to deal with those things as much. And Elixir does have a really welcoming community. I think there's this really funny term in the church community called seeker friendly. And I think Elixir is considered seeker friendly. It's like new people who are coming, they get kind and good answers to their questions. There's good tutorials, there's good documentation. You're not expected to just know computer science to be able to start touching your first line of code. I think it's really nice. And it's not too uncommon to get either the creator of Elixir's input on something on the Elixir forum, or the creator of the web framework, which is akin to Rails, called Phoenix. Yeah. So I think for me, Elixir really, really nicely encapsulates all the. I use encapsulates too much. Fits into all of my attributes, the things that I care about for choosing a language, and I think you should at least consider a lot of them for yourself. This is a crazy thing. Elixir is considered syntax complete, which is a nice little bonus, which means I don't know how many Ruby versions have we went through, and how often do we have to upgrade our old apps. And for beginners who are jumping on a new project, and suddenly it's an old Ruby Ruby 2.4 app, or I'm sure it's end of life by now, but Ruby 2.7, and now Ruby 3 is out, and you have to juggle these two syntaxes in your head as a new person who's just learning one of them for the first time. I think it's really neat that Elixir is considered syntax complete, and there's only nice additions like compile time additions, or other additions to frameworks, as opposed to trying to create version 2.0 of Elixir. So I really think we should all ask ourselves, for my business or for my company, why. And I hope you noticed that I did something mildly clever with the pipe operator, which is short feedback loops feed into business value, which feeds into more business value. So I really do think short feedback loops are key to running successful tech companies, businesses in general, but I think maybe we're hopefully a little bit more aware of it in tech. And I also think that short feedback loops and Elixir in these interesting languages can really engage you as developers and your employees or your coworkers that maybe don't feel engaged with the same language they've been using for 15 years. So it's just something to think about. So I think there's also one other kind of interesting part that Erlang and Elixir, this ecosystem that you get for free when you use any of the languages, comes with is fault tolerance and process isolation. So Erlang comes built in with this idea of any of these little processes, these little actors that we send around, any of them should be able to die and not bring down the whole program. So, if you've ever had one of your unicorn processes in Ruby, you start using 99% CPU, or you just have a bug that bubbles up to whatever the process manager, unicorn, or I can't remember where they are, passenger, is managing, it will crash all of the threads in that tree. Those app servers do their best to try and isolate larger chunks of the program from causing everything else to crash. But in Elixir, we literally can have hundreds of thousands of processes on one machine. They're not threads. They're these little things managed by Erlang. And if one crashes, you can by default, it'll crash independently and restart. The app itself won't crash, but you can change those rules. But I think the interesting thing is that one process never, ever has to crash anything else unless you choose to, which sometimes you do. But one of the great parts about process isolation is that each one of these threads, even if you're looking at the actor model in Scala or some other language, the actor model is, like I said, all these little processes sending messages to each other. And each of these processes in Elixir and Erlang are garbage collected independently. They all have their own heap. They don't share any memory. And for those of you who have ever run into some JVM issue in prod, or some of these really hard to solve issues of concurrency and scaling, you just don't have to deal with that. There's no garbage collection that slows your program down for however many seconds to clean up all the garbage, because each of the garbage collector is consistently able to clean up these individual processes heaps instead of having to do it for the whole world. Anyways, most of you probably don't care about that. Some of you will be really impressed by that. So again, all of it comes back to shortened feedback loops for me. Make them as short as possible, make our jobs as easy as possible so we can focus on the hardest stuff. And one of the reasons I think for business Elixir is really good is it lets you make decisions at the last possible moment. This is some idea from lean manufacturing. And anyways, you just want to defer decisions until it's irresponsible to make the decision. But that usually doesn't mean doing it as soon as possible. So I'm going to try and speed through this so you guys can see some of the stats at the end. But expensive decisions are going to microservices. Stick with a monolith. Don't do microservices prematurely, in Elixir at least. And the reason you can do this is because you can scale Elixir monoliths for at least 5 times as long as far as user growth goes as any other software. And it sounds crazy right now. It sounds like I'm just saying shit, but you'll see when I give you some of the stats that I'm not kidding. You can literally scale with a monolith for 5 times longer than you would otherwise be able to. You don't have to deal with the overhead of microservices, because believe me, it is, from personal experience, microservices are a huge headache unless you have a lot of resources to deal with them. And the great part is when you have this monolith in this functional language, and you're trying to encapsulate things, and it encourages you to do it. Refactoring and rearranging code becomes really easy. There's no relative paths in Elixir. Everything is a module namespace. So I don't know if you noticed, but all I said was demo.fizzbuzz. It didn't matter where that file was located. As long as it's part of our project, that is the namespace for fizzbuzz. I can call it without having to do imports that are weird, right? And I just call it based on its namespace, and there's no conflicts. It's great. It also makes like changing file structure really easy. If you decide that, hey, this file structure doesn't work for us, it's not very clear, we need to probably rearrange code by features. It's amazing. I think this also helps you grow your infrastructure or your architecture. With actors and everything else, I think it can just be a joy to pull things apart compared to the way it usually is for us in our Java or JavaScript worlds. And when I talk about less infrastructure to worry about, I wanted to show you this little graph. This is a little table that somebody made called, his name is Sasha Urich. And this is hilarious. If you guys have dealt with these things, if you've dealt with Nginx, you've had to set up your app server, your web server, your background processing, your service crash recovery, all of these things can be taken care of with the built-in stuff in Erlang and Elixir. For essentially no overhead of maintenance, right? It's all managed the same way your app is managed. Which is to say very well. The only thing that I kind of contend is you might use, service D to make sure your application, the beam is running, and you would probably use a different database than the one that there's actually 3 that are built into Erlang that have different roles. But I think our type of consistency guarantees we typically need to come from a relational database or, a more, just a different database. So, but anyways, I think this is like internalize this, look at this and say, yes, like if you've ever dealt with adding any of these services to your app just to make it run WebSockets or something like that, you don't have to. You just don't have to with Elixir and Erlang. It's beautiful. If you need to use Firebase, there's a lot of crazy stuff in the Erlang world because it allows you to do a lot of, I don't know. It's just like there's a lot of really interesting stuff. Someone made a full Firebase alternative, which has now raised some absurd amount of money, but it's all built in Elixir for doing real-time stuff that Firebase does. Don't use Kubernetes. I would encourage you not to use Kubernetes or AWS Lambda if you're using Elixir, because the orchestration that Elixir will do by default that you can do with its built-in features is, honestly, it's more robust than Kubernetes. Kubernetes is complicated as hell. And when there's a crash in Kubernetes, it's hellish to find out where it's coming from. And then AWS Lambda requires you to change your mental model, which again, I've done. I know this mental model. I know there's pain points in this. And you can, if you're already using Elixir, you're in an amazing spot to just continue using Elixir, save tons of money because Elixir will cost you way less than AWS Lambda. And, you just don't need to use a lot of this infrastructure. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to say, don't go polyglot. You can use Elixir for literally all of these different types of applications. I think the embedded in IoT is one of the most interesting. There's some really, really, really cool stuff. If you didn't know, Cisco switches, which is where our internet, I think 80% of the internet goes through, run Erlang, which is what Elixir compiles down to, the same code as Erlang. And so it's rock solid, super fast, and most of our internet goes through it. So it's not a new technology. It's just a new, beautiful cover on a very battle-tested technology. So there's a few reasons why not. I'm just going to blast it. I think, honestly, the biggest one is hiring. If you don't do remote hiring, you're not going to have a good time with Elixir in any city that's not a tech hub. I think if you have really CPU-intensive operations and you need your whole application to be absolutely CPU-intensive and there's no orchestration needed, you don't need Elixir. Like, go create a Scala binary or something. Same with operating systems. Probably not a good use case. Machine learning, if you're going to be writing machine learning in something other than Elixir, period, dot, as it sits. You might still use Elixir for orchestrating that machine learning, which a lot of companies are doing. But the actual machine learning code itself, the TensorFlow, all that stuff, it's not going to be written in Elixir. Yeah, and if you're highly coupled to the JVM already and you're happy, and you're an enterprise company, the risk of moving to a new software language is not a good decision. So, if there's pain though, consider it. Hiring again needs to be remote. I'm not going to get into it too much. I think I've already pushed up on my time too much, but it's better than you think. There's great documentation and great resources to help train junior developers and others. So I think you'd be pleasantly surprised if you're willing to take a chance on younger people, that their ability to learn and dive into Elixir is much easier than you may think. So should you take the plunge? Really quick stats. I'm going to skip this one. This one, yeah, great. Their tests ran 15 times faster. Bleacher Report was really interesting. They kept all of their requests on the Bleacher Report's a sports website, and Bleacher Report is a sports website, and they're the second biggest one in the States. And on NFL Draft Day, this is the graph of their requests served. And you look at the bottom. There's different days. And you can see on April 28th, there's a lot of requests. It's proprietary how much, but this number of requests is 30,000 people more than the previous maximum they've ever served. So they didn't come out of nowhere. So I'm assuming it's at least 60 to 90,000 requests concurrently, at the same moment, people connected to their site, showing NFL draft picks. So this is their request served. So again, 60 to 90,000 concurrent users requesting a bunch of sports data live. And their latency, as you can see in that first case, in the 428, that never actually got above 150 milliseconds. Further later on 430, and it got closer. They said it never really got above 170, despite that sharp line there. But anyways, amazing latency. Pinterest, back in 2016, I think the key point of this slide is they went from 1,400 servers doing spam detection. When they rewrote part of their service in Elixir, went down to 70 servers. That's 95% reduction. It's $2 million saving per year. And with the fewer servers, they had better performance and reliability. Elixir is truly a astounding technology. And if any of you use Discord, everything you do goes through Elixir. Elixir and Discord, and this is old, I'm sure during the pandemic, I wouldn't be surprised if they doubled their usage, but they serve 11 million concurrent users at a time at Discord. WhatsApp, all built on Erlang, which is, again, the same code that Elixir gets compiled down to. The VM code, Erlang Virtual Machine. And when they were acquired by Facebook many years ago, they had 600 million active monthly users, and they were running all of their messaging for those 600 million users on 40 servers. I mean, most of us who have worked for an enterprise know that a little enterprise that serves a handful of people, probably has 40 servers. So it's pretty impressive. There's a lot of great success stories, and I encourage you to take the red pill and drink the Kool-Aid. Credit Nelson, who's in the chat, for saying I've already drank the Kool-Aid, and I was like, this needs to go into the slides. So here's a Family Guy reference for you if any of you like Family Guy. Anyways, thank you so much for trusting me with your time. I'm very sorry that I went over, and I hope it was worth it for you. And I'll leave it on this resources page. So if you guys want to take a picture of it, these are the names of the things. They are links, but of course you can't get the links just through here. I'll post it up later. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm out of breath.
How was it? Pretty good. I think you gave us a lot of really good information there. And thanks for talking about the community around the language. I found that it's becoming an increasingly important decision when picking a language or a framework for a project, especially if you're new to it. There just aren't, like, you kind of rely on other people to answer your questions because tech is just evolving so rapidly now that you can't just rely on the set of documentation that came with that language or framework, right?
Totally.
Like we used to be able to.
Yeah, well, and I think even more so, we were all more equipped. Like, well, at least it felt like people were more equipped. People were used to bad, intense documentation back in the day. But I feel like so many people are becoming new to programming. And if you don't have accessible tutorials, accessible guides, it's just really intimidating to jump into the documentation for a language and try and figure it out from there.
Yeah, it can
Sorry.
be. So if somebody wanted to learn Elixir, what would you recommend are some good resources? Actually, maybe you might have listed them on your last slide there.
Totally. Yeah, I did,
Yeah.
but I can point out some of the really good ones.
Yeah.
Honestly, the docs in Elixir are the best docs I've found. They're incredible. If you just go onto their website, like they'll walk you through every interesting part of Elixir. If you want, I think, a really fun where you're actually building something, Dave Thomas, again, the pragmatic programmer guy, he has a course called Elixir for Programmers. I think it's $30 and it's well worth it. Super fun. You build a hangman game. And he teaches you good coding practices. He teaches you about the language, and you build a web front end for it as well at the very end, only after you've developed all the core business logic, and it's really fun. So those are my two, I think, top resources. There's a whole bunch of books on prog around Elixir, but I do think that Elixir for Programmers, if you're already a programmer, you already have like a background in programming, is the best one I've found to start with. So
cool. I'll definitely check that one out. What about IDEs? What are the IDE options out there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think IDEs nowadays everything's becoming a lot easier with I don't know if have you heard of the language server protocol? It's something Microsoft came out with very, very intelligently for VS Code. It's a protocol that if you write, essentially you conform to this protocol for syntax highlighting and refactoring of your language, and then all the IDE needs to do is implement that protocol, and they will get all of the stuff that anyone has developed for any language that conforms to the language server protocol. So now that
about, not just syntax highlighting and formatting, but like test runners and refactoring tools.
No, totally. I think that's all part of the language server protocol, but I think a better, like for VS Code, the Elixir support's solid. Like I think it's where it is for most mainstream languages. So there's a lot of good plugins that'll help you do refactoring, jump to definition, those sort of things. There's nothing, I would say, like there's no WebStorm for it yet. Like I was coding on WebStorm, if you caught that, and I just installed the Elixir plugin, and it works for me quite well. Like I don't know, you saw my feedback loops on it. It looked like a normal language.
Yeah, it looked like the test runner hooked into EXUnit pretty well.
Totally fine. Yeah. The test runner debugging, all of those things are seem to be fine on all of the major IDEs. I used to do some Vim with Elixir, so that's also possible, depending on how crazy everybody is. But
yeah, it's just I've done some Elixir, but I haven't found anything that would allow you to do things like extract certain chunks of code into a new function or anything like that. And I think that's probably a more complicated process for functional languages. And so
I would say it's probably more like for me personally, I think in a functional language it would be easier, but I think there's less resources going towards it. But that either way, I think there's not like there's no Ruby mine for Elixir. Yeah.
Yeah.
There might be.
Oh, well, I think it's just probably with a little bit more usage as it gets more popular, then JetBrains will probably be incentivized to build something more standalone.
Absolutely.
I have a bunch of questions. So,
okay. That's great.
How's your experience with been with Phoenix on the front end? Like, do you feel that it's keeping up with like the evolution of the front end world, or is the highest value in the back end where it's really fast?
Oh, such a good question. Okay. So whoever asked that, thank you for giving me a good, like, hit it out of the park question. So Phoenix, for anyone who's unfamiliar, is the web framework for Elixir. So it's the thing that you would reach to similar to Rails or Django. That gives you both a view templating language and something like an ORM. So anyways, I'll move on. I'll answer your question. I think the answer is absolutely. I think one of the best selling points of Elixir is that I think Phoenix is better than any other web framework I know of. Certainly, I think it's better thought out than Rails. I think it allows you to grow a lot better than Rails applications do by default. It helps you not shoot yourself in the foot in a million different ways. And they also, the Elixir world invented this concept called live view, right? And live view is this thing where the pain of writing single page apps, if you've ever done both front end and back end and had to deal with and been the one who maintains your Webpack config, your Babel config, your TypeScript config, these are not simple things, and the overhead is non-trivial for making everything work together and work nicely. And then the amount of times you have to write logic for validation for models, for instance, you have to validate in the back end that, hey, did this person bypass our front end validation? In which case, we have to write the validation in the back end. But you also need good UI, so you need to have validation in the front end for your forms or whatever it is. Phoenix has this thing called live view where it, because of how Elixir works, it's the only language I think that could really do this. But they hold a copy, like the server will hold a copy of each session state in memory, not in the database. And when you connect to it, it will give you a fast, instantly rendered template, very, very, very fast. And then all of the different pieces that you've said come from the backend, it will automatically update, do real-time back and forth updating of a UI without you having to write JavaScript, without you having to write glue code, any of this. And so this is actually, if you've heard of the new hotness from DHH, his thing was inspired by LiveView. If you've heard of, I can't remember what it's called in the PHP world, that was also inspired by LiveView. So what I would say is Phoenix is absolutely the innovator in the web space. It allows you to write better web apps that will actually scale, and it keeps your concerns actually separated, which is a huge criticism of mine on Django and Rails, and even like Mongoose. So, anyways, sorry, rant over.
No, that's good.
Phoenix, I think, is really great.
I would love to see a talk on LiveView one day, because that's something that I've heard a lot about, but haven't really seen working in real life. Because I'm also, like, with LiveView, I'm wondering how that would scale, because the front and back end are so tightly coupled. Can you scale them separately, or would you have to scale the front end back end?
Totally, they scale together, with the exception of your assets. You're still going to push bigger assets like images and stuff out to your CDNs. But change.org, during the election campaign, so they're a big election platform in the States, they were full live view for the whole election, and they see millions of people coming through. And so, because that's, of course, it feels like it should be a concern, but Elixir truly enables that to be so much less of a concern than you'd expect. But if you just want to see it, for anyone who wants to see how live view works, because it is if you read the comments on YouTube, they're like, build the to-do list, and then someone's like, live view, hold my beer. It's one of these. It's amazing. And if you want to see a video in 15 minutes, someone built, the creator of Live View in Phoenix builds a real-time Twitter clone in 15 minutes. And
yeah, maybe let's link to that
yeah.
in the meetup comments so people can see that. It's does that give you access then to the JavaScript ecosystem, or are you really then tied to?
Good. That's a good question. So I think you do, when you want to link back into the JavaScript ecosystem, you absolutely can, but you need to be careful. So you couldn't use something like React. The reason for that is because React wants to control the DOM. So Vue React, they want to control the DOM, and so does Live View, because it needs to. Otherwise, if things are changing it can't be certain that when I send this piece of information back, the client's in a consistent state. There's a thing called Alpine.js, which is a super minimal framework, which does not want to control the DOM. It does change elements in the DOM. And so what's emerged that's been the favored framework, because you also just don't need to do as much. Like, you already have some basic lifecycle stuff. You don't need all of the life cycles you need in React, because you really just need mount and respond to an event. And that's all you need, because everything else is taken care of when you don't have to worry about going back and forth and managing server state. Sorry.
No, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole there. So
I'll post in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. I have one last question, and then I will let everybody go. One of the struggles that I had in Elixir was the inability to mock stuff out. And so I found it really hard to, compartmentalize my various modules for testing for very complex problem, like very complex domain concepts that have a number of dependencies. Like anything more than 3, and your tests are getting into a more integration level. So.
Okay.
Sorry. That might be like. I don't have a whole bunch of experience in Elixir, so I think that there might be some better ways to structure the module so that there isn't as much tight coupling. But the projects that I've been on with Elixir, I'm coming onto a legacy project on a big project that hasn't had a whole bunch of testing. I need to work on a certain piece. And so traditionally with a legacy system, if you need to modify a certain piece, you want to try to mock out the stuff that you don't want to touch, right? And so that you can isolate what you're working on and TDD that. But I didn't find anything like that for Elixir. So then I am tied to all of the legacy stuff that it came with.
Got it. I see what you're saying. So there is there is actually a mocking framework. It has a very opinionated view of how mocking should be done.
Yes, as there always is.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think they are right, but I don't. Given the situation, I guess you're asking like, hey, how can I slip a scene in between, what I want to change and all the rest of this legacy application, and so I can isolate my tests. And in a legacy system that has no tests, I
feel like you're you don't have a lot of options in Elixir as of right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would, in some ways, like I'm speaking out of my ass here, Serene, because I don't know your situation. I would maybe put out there though that maybe you should only be doing integration level tests, because you don't understand how different things will. Like, by mocking it, you give yourself a false sense of security of
that's fair.
I won't be affecting other things, but that doesn't change the fact that there are times when you really do need that.
And so that's what ended up happening, right? We just ended up having to write integration tests that had a whole bunch of setup in order to accommodate for the legacy black box that we don't want to touch, right? Which then makes for larger and more fragile tests that aren't quite as valuable. But that's just Anyways,
Yeah,
I
and
was hoping that maybe you knew of some better techniques.
well, I mean, techniques. I have techniques, but they're not like Elixir specific. It's more just, and it's not for working with the like in one application that I'm trying to move from Django over to Elixir, which is my own application, and I don't have a handle on the old Django app. So um, there's this concept of a strangler pattern, if you're familiar with it, and and so for that, we're trying to slice it off endpoint by endpoint. And what I mean for anyone who's listening that doesn't understand what I'm talking about, the strangler pattern is kind of how it sounds. It's like you take a new application and you strangle the old one by essentially being a middleware between them and the outside world. And then what you can start to do is you forward all the requests on that come through and they go back. That's great. And then as you want to start implementing new functionality, you switch the path essentially from the old app to the new app for just this one endpoint. And you start gradually able to strangle the old app, for lack of a better word. But yeah. Anyways, I think that's an interesting strategy. Not much more insight than that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole talk on working with legacy systems. Yeah, that's a whole skill on its own, and that comes with its own challenges and stuff. Language and framework independent, right? So, anyhow, I want to just thank you so much for putting this talk together. I know how much work it is to get the slides together and figure out what to talk about and all the things.
I appreciate everyone's time.
It's a lot more than it appears to be. And I want to thank everybody for attending and engaging in chat. And special thanks to my team for their continuous support and passion for the community and supporting me and the time that I take out of my day in order to organize this. I really appreciate you guys.
And thank you, Serene, for doing this and making this possible.
I love having people around and the opportunity to network. I hope that we can have meetups one day in person soon. But until then, I'm really grateful that we have the technology that's still allowing us to connect online. So thank you so much. I will grab the slides from you when we are done, and I'll post them on the meetup description if anybody wants to refer to that. And if anybody has any questions, reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out to me on Twitter at John O'Coates. Be happy to try and answer any of them, because I saw a few on there like, as a beginner dev, what would you recommend I try? And that's not like a passing question, so shoot me a message on Twitter.
There's also the YYC dev Slack group. If you're not on it, just post a comment on the meetup and I'll send you an invite. We have some interesting heated conversations on there all the time about which is the best language. We obviously know what the answer is now, right? Otherwise, I will see you guys all at our next meetup. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.